Good evening. This is Tony DeWall. On behalf of the Palo Alto University Rotary Club, it is my great pleasure to welcome you to this environmental forum. Our speaker tonight is world-renowned mountaineer, environmental guardian, and inductee to the Hall of Fame of the state of California, Dr. Arlene Blum.
The parking lot, but he was very handsome, so I kept gasping, and we got high on the mountain in this beautiful place. And so I started alternating between mountains and molecules. And can you hear me okay, by the way? Is the audio fine? Good. When I was in graduate school at Berkeley and passed my qualifying exams, I heard about an expedition to Denali, the highest mountain in North America. And at that time, no team of women had climbed Denali. And so I organized an all-women's team, and we actually reached the summit of Denali. So it was the first all-women's team way back in 1970. And after that, I did expeditions all over the world. When I got my PhD, I did an endless winter, 15 months of climbing expeditions in Asia and Africa. Came back to Stanford, where I was a postdoctoral fellow in the Department of Biochemistry in the 70s. And at that time, went to a mountain called Trisol, which was a 24,000-foot mountain in India. You can see it. If those of you are mountain hikers, it looks like a nice walk, nice snow. But it turned out that when you got to the summit, there was a precipitous face with a big excuse me, a big cornice on the top, and our lead climber, those footsteps, let's see, can I do a little arrow? Yeah. Our lead climber went here to see if the other summit was higher, and he fell through a cornice to his death. And that was absolutely horrifying. It's a wonderful young climber. And I decided in his memory, I wanted to do something to help the environment. He was an early environmentalist. And so a guy named Bruce Ames, who some of you may have heard of, the Ames test, if people are in that sort of field, he'd been on my PhD committee at Berkeley. As I said, I was a postdoc at Stanford. And so I said, I want to do something for the environment. And he said, well, there's this flame retardant called Tris, and it's 10% of the weight of most of the pajamas that kids are wearing in America. And I think it's harmful. I think it might come out of the pajamas and get into the children. And so I thought, well, let's see. So I found a mom who bought her daughter's pajamas in England. And I said, can we put your daughter in regular pajamas and do an experiment? You didn't need human subjects' permission in those days. And we collected urine from the little girl, and it turned out every day she wore the pajamas, the level of Tris breakdown products in her urine went up. And the breakdown products were cancer-causing brominated molecules. And we realized every child in America pretty much was wearing these pajamas. And then we ran some mutagenicity screens to see whether chemical changes DNA, which is what Bruce Ames did. And it turned out this Tris was one of the strongest mutagens that had ever been measured. And so this was like, oh my goodness, we have to tell the parents of America kids shouldn't be wearing these pajamas, and we should write a paper and tell everyone. And then I got invited to climb this mountain. Do you know what mountain this is? Everybody's on mute, so you can't answer. I like to ask questions. Anyway, it's Mount Everest. And at that point, 1976, it had been climbed only once by Americans. In 63, no American woman had even had the opportunity to try to climb Everest. So I had this dilemma. Would I try to write my paper about the flame retardants in the kids' pajamas, which needed to happen immediately, or would I go to climb Mount Everest? And I asked the audience how many of those, but I can't really see people raise their hands. I suppose I could in the chat, but we won't do that this time. Anyway, I actually decided to do both. I would keep working on my paper, and I'd go to Mount Everest. So while I was climbing in the beautiful Khumbu ice ball and placing ladders across big crevasses and going up steep ice faces, I'd get to camp at night and I'd write my paper. So this is my high point on Everest. It's 24,500 feet, and it was an altitude record for an American woman then. And that's my flag. And the petri dish on the right, can't quite see it, it had tris. So it had lots of colonies of bacteria growing happily in the tris, and the one on the left did not have tris. So we reached the summit of Everest. We were the second American expedition to do so. And I came back and wrote my paper. And the reason I put this in is the subtitle of this paper says a lot about what I'm doing now. So the subtitle is "The main flame retardant in children's pajamas is a mutagen and should not be used." Now, for those of you who read scientific papers, you know they always end with the same statement of what always needs to be done next after any scientific paper. If somebody's not on mute, does anybody want to say? Okay, more study.
More study, yeah.
More study. Every paper ends, more study is needed. So this was really unusual that we did a few experiments and we said that this chemical that was used all throughout the country shouldn't be used anymore. And when scientists make statements like that, things really change. And 3 months after our paper came out, the Consumer Product Safety Commission banned pajamas with tris, with brominated tris, and that seemed like a great thing. However, and I will take the time to tell this story, it was funny. So after a month or so, I thought, I wonder if there really is tris in pajamas. And so I remember I rode my bike to Penny's and I bought 20 pairs of pajamas in different sizes. And the sales lady said, "Oh, you have such a nice family, dear." And I sort of felt like a super spy. And I took my pajamas home and I cut little pieces of fabric from the inside the hem because I thought these will be nice gifts for my friends with young children. And then I analyzed what was in the pajamas. And some of them still had brominated tris, but almost all of them had chlorinated tris, virtually the same chemical. And so we did more studies, wrote another paper. Chlorinated tris was removed from pajamas way back in 1978. But what turned out to be pretty amazing is it was used in many other things. And if any of you happens to have a couch that you bought between about 2006 and 2012, 5% of the weight of the foam in your couch is that same chlorinated tris that we got out of kids' pajamas. And if your couch was before 2005, unfortunately, it's a much worse chemical. But I didn't learn that till later. But it is an important part of my story. So at that point, we had climbed Everest. All the world's 8,000 meter peaks had been climbed by men, but no woman had climbed to 8,000 meters. And I really thought it was time that some women got a chance. And on my way back from Everest, I got a permit for an American women's expedition to Annapurna 1. And Annapurna 1 was the first 8,000 meter peak ever climbed. I don't know if any of you ever read Maurice Herzog's classic book, Annapurna, about the 1950 ascent. And I thought it was the first 8,000 meter peak ever climbed. It must be the easiest. But for those of you who aren't climbers, guess of all the high peaks in the world, which is the most dangerous? Annapurna, and probably the hardest to climb. So we did not know that. That's our team. And we're all still friends. We have reunions. We were supposed to have one in April. It's now postponed till October, but I'm not too optimistic. But we all still get together. And so this is back in 1978 when we were at Annapurna Base Camp. And so the mountain had really steep ice climbing, huge avalanches, ice ridges, really, really a tough mountain. And I did write a book, as Meredith said, Annapurna Women's Place, and tells that story. And my glamour factoid, we'll see if it's true, but a bunch of quite famous people who've had Academy Awards, etc., are wanting to make it into a movie right now. And we're in endless negotiations, all the rights to my whole life forever. And I don't want them to have that. So we'll see what happens. But it may happen. It'll be a miracle, but it could happen. So anyway, yeah, the people who did Free Solo and some others want to do a story of this. So we will see. Anyway, back to Annapurna. This is beautiful, beautiful, really hard climbing. And a real first. We just didn't know if women could do this. But we did. We reached the summit. We were the first women, the first Americans. It's an altitude record for American women. We unfurled a Nepali flag, an American flag, held together by Save the Whales pin. And we were very happy. And then there was a second summit bid, and we lost 2 of our team. And Annapurna, since then, it's got the highest fatality rate of any of the Himalayan mountains. It's really, really dangerous. And we were very, very sad. Well, I'm going to skip ahead now. My more recent adventures were, this is my daughter Annalise and her dad Rob. And when she was 3 to 6 months old, we carried her across the Alps with baby. And so there she is. This was one of the first baby backpacks, and she's in her little Gore-Tex baby suit. And so we carried her from Yugoslavia to France. And then being a mom became my big adventure. And this was my first book. And I spent 20 years writing my second book, Breaking Trail: A Climbing Life, trying to understand. I'd had a very tough childhood, and I was trying to understand how my childhood gave me some of the strengths for my mountain adventures. And raised my daughter. I spent a year writing Annapurna, and then 20 years writing Breaking Trail. And just when I finished, my daughter was starting college. She actually went to Stanford, where you are. And I thought, I'm an extrovert. I've been being a mom and writing a book, and I was doing leadership training in Silicon Valley during those years. But I thought, I want to go back to the lab and do some science and do something to help the world. But I didn't have a clue what I was going to do. And if you read Breaking Trail, the last sentence is, the future is like an unbroken snow slope. I hope I can find a way to break trail to a better world. And so I thought, maybe I could go back to science, but I haven't done science for 26 years, and science moves on. Maybe I can get a job in a lab, as a technician, watching test tubes, anything. I want to go back to science. And then I learned that Tris was back in furniture, the very same Tris we'd gotten out of kids' pajamas. And it just happened that Arthur Sulzberger, who owns the New York Times, was a climber, and I knew him. And I said, this is terrible. Tris is back. Can I write something for the New York Times Magazine? And he said, no, I don't think so, but do you want to write an op-ed? And I was like, sure. And they let me, and I wrote this big op-ed, and they had a great illustration, and a lot of people heard about it, and I started my new adventure. The op-ed came out in November of 2007, and since then, honestly, every day I have felt like I'm on Annapurna, with that amount of excitement and danger and a real summit that's so important. And the summit is a healthier world for all of us. And I feel like I have this fantastic team. I'll talk about it, but we work with scientists from all over the world, businesses that want to make and sell healthy products, big companies, governments, and we're all working for a healthier world. And at this time of this pandemic, I think people are more sensitive to what they touch, what they breathe, what's happening. And we're hoping that we can come out of this more sensitive to using less of these chemicals. So now I'll tell you my second story, my current adventure. So I founded the Green Science Policy Institute, and we do research. We write very good peer-reviewed papers with some of the best scientists in the world. And we really communicate science in our papers. Some of our papers have 20 or 30,000 downloads, which is very unusual for scientific papers. They have impact. We do workshops. I would invite you all to our next one at UC Berkeley, but who knows when it will be in person, and retreats actually at the Quaker Center in the Santa Cruz Mountains, not far. And they're all around bringing together people from 4 sectors: government, business, academia, and nonprofits, who have a passion for making the world healthier, and bringing them together with a great facilitator and big ideas, and we come up with plans and we change things. And I'll tell you a bit about that. So a big problem is here, I can't see hands raised, but I'll just ask you, if a chemical is in your shampoo or your toothpaste or your chair, Do you think someone in the government is making sure it's safe for your health? No. Okay, that's the right answer. Yes. No, no. Interesting. I gave this talk to like 500 PhD chemists, and they all said yes. We make the chemicals, somebody else makes sure they're safe for health. But nobody does. And there are perhaps tens of thousands of chemicals. And we have one law called TSCA, the Toxic Substances Control Act. It passed in the 70s. And 62,000 chemicals then were grandfathered, like they're okay. So one example is asbestos. 10,000 people a year die of asbestos disease, and the EPA could not regulate asbestos. So this really doesn't work. So what do you do about these tens of thousands of chemicals? And then a second problem is what we call the regrettable substitute problem. You remember when the brominated tris came out of the kids' pajamas? What was the replacement? Chlorinated tris. On the left, there's a flame retardant. Oops, no, I didn't want to go that way. Let's go back. A flame retardant, it's called deca ether. So it's 5 bromines, this ether bond, 5 bromines. It's used in electronics, television cases, but it turns out to be persistent and to bioaccumulate up the food chain, to be toxic. And after years of research and advocacy, it was phased out, and the replacement is deca, 10-bromine, diphenyl, ethane, and the same problems. And so that's what happens. You spend years doing science, doing policy, and you get a virtually identical chemical in the same family. Similar function, structure, and toxicity. So we thought, what can we do about tens of thousands of chemicals? You regulate one, and you get the chemical cousin. And when you have so many, how can you evaluate each one of these chemicals? It takes years and years. But if you divide them into classes or groups with similar qualities, you can do things. And so we came to realize that there were 6 groups or classes, we say, of chemicals that contain most of the harmful chemicals in everyday products. And these are the 6 classes. And if you go to 6classes.org, which I recommend, we have 4-minute videos. I spent 2 years developing these videos. They started out as 1-hour academic talks that we shrunk to like 15 minutes. And then we heard that young people don't have 15-minute attention span, 4 minutes. So they're 4 minutes long. And you can learn about the chemicals, where they're used, how you can reduce your exposure, and a success story. And we're going to talk about a couple of these classes tonight. If a chemical's in these classes, we're not saying you can never use it, but we'll say, is it necessary? So for example, fluorinated stain repellents are put on carpets, but they are cancer-causing and harmful, and the largest source of exposure to children is carpeting. So if you say to a mom, do you want a nice stain repellent white shag carpet you can drop chocolate milk on, but there's going to be chemicals harming your child that go into their body that stay there for years, she might be okay with a dark shag carpet where she doesn't need the PFAS. And then another question, is it really worth it? And then if the mom says, I really have to have that white shag carpet, then can you find a safer alternative? So those are the questions. So I'm going to start with my very favorite class of chemicals because it's the worst, and they're called PFAS. Again, I'd like to ask how many people have ever heard of PFAS, but I can only see a few of you, so maybe I'll ask later on when the slides are over and I can see more people. So these chemicals are carbons with fluorines all around, and the carbon-fluorine bond is like the strongest bond in the periodic table. So it gives these molecules some really good properties of water and stain repellency. So PFAS is used for stain repellency, but the other problem is that these bonds are so strong that they never break in nature, never. So they're around forever, for geologic time. They're called forever chemicals. And they came to the public attention. They were used to manufacture Teflon and released into the air and water in the Ohio River Valley and 70,000 residents were drinking contaminated water. There were lawsuits, and the funding for that lawsuit did the first studies on the harm of PFAS in humans. Have any of you seen Dark Waters or heard about it? So it's a wonderful film with Mark Ruffalo and Anne Hathaway, if you've ever heard of them. They're playing Rob Bilott, who's an attorney that we work with. And it's a very dramatic story of how he persevered and about terrible contamination of water from a DuPont factory in West Virginia. But we've since learned that water all over the country is contaminated with these chemicals. So we all have PFAS in us pretty much. And the health risks are cancer, high cholesterol, obesity. They harm the immune system, which could make people more susceptible to COVID. They're endocrine disruptors, so they're definitely problematic. And on the left, this is our usual regrettable substitute story, the chemical that was used since 1950. It's called C8. That's what led to the movie and contaminated drinking water. C8 was found to be extremely persistent, bioaccumulate, toxic in the 60s. It took 50 years to phase it out, from 1965 to 2015. It was phased out, and what's the replacement? On the right, C6, same structure, pretty much the same problems. And lots of advertising of companies, how they have completely converted from C8 to C6. And some of these, for people who are chemists, some of these are C6 polymers are safe for their intended use. But the one that I can always get a good laugh with the chemical audience, from the ads, they say C6 polymers are safe because they cannot break down to C8. So a molecule, something with 6 carbons cannot break down to something with 8 carbons, yes? Does not imply safety. So nobody knew much about these, and in 2000, I really learned about them around 2012, and I started a call once a month. We have a call with scientists from all over the world, over 100 scientists who study these chemicals, because every scientist who studied them was worried. And when I found people I didn't know all over the world, I said, do you want to talk once a month about the problem of these PFAS chemicals and what could be done? And they all said yes, because they felt isolated with their knowledge of the harm. And so we started 2013. We've been having a call a month with a lot of the same scientists. And along the way, we did some things that have really made a difference. The first thing is we made a statement documenting all the harm. And it was signed by 230 scientists from 40 countries. And it was published in Environmental Health Perspectives, which is a very prestigious journal. And we did a lot of communication around it. So it was on the front page of the New York Times. It was the first time the world heard about PFAS, was the publicity of the Madrid Statement. And usually when you write a paper, we work hard to do publicity on our papers. The publicity lasts one day. If you do that, you have one day and then it's gone. And you have to be really on it. But with this, it just went on and on. And, a few weeks later, Nick Kristof wrote about chemicals in your popcorn, and National Geographic wrote about the chemicals in pizza boxes and carpeting. And if you really get excited about PFAS, there are people like me, we say we're the PFAS obsessed. We could read and talk about PFAS forever. It's so interesting. Sharon Lerner in The Intercept wrote this great series, The Teflon Toxic, of long, detailed, really interesting articles. But then the thing that changed everything was the New York Times Magazine cover story about Rob Bilott, the attorney we work with, the lawyer who became DuPont's worst nightmare. And it was a really good story. And I actually wrote the guy who wrote the story, and I said, this is a fantastic story. Do you want to do more science writing? And I'm going to say that to all of you. I hope you all want to be on our mailing list and hear from us once a month. If you go to any of our websites, you get a chance. And if you only want to hear from us 4 times a year, which is fine, you go to arleneblum.com, my website, and you get the choice of my personal mailing list, which is only 4 times a year, or our once a month one. But anyway, I said to the author of this, Nathaniel Rich, do you want to be on our mailing list? And he said, no, you're not going to say that. He said, no, I get too much email, and I'm not really a science writer. I was interested in the guy's character. But he said, I've never gotten so many responses to an article, and I'll share some of them with you. And what he shared with me was like a letter from the governor of New York to the EPA demanding that levels be set in water for what's healthy and what's not, because there weren't any levels. So there were high levels all around the country, but nobody knew what it meant because the EPA never set a level. And there were a lot of pressure from the industry to set a really high level of what's safe, and from scientists and nonprofits to set a low level, and they never set one. But after this article came out, the EPA set a level. So it just says the power of journalism. And the level was something 70 nanograms per liter, 70 parts per trillion. And as it turned out, at the very same time that was happening, with our scientists, we were coming up for ideas for papers. And I said, let's write a paper tracing back from all the communities with high levels to the sources. And so we determined the sources were industrial sites, military bases, airports, wastewater treatment plants, places where they make and use the chemicals. And we calculated with the EPA level that 6 million people's drinking water was above that level, which is a huge thing. And it got a lot of publicity, and it's gone on and on. PFAS is big news every day now. And that was a level of 70, but the level has gone down, 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 which means more and more people have contaminated drinking water. So a couple of stories. Hush puppies were made in Michigan by Wolverine, and they treated the leather with Scotchgard, and they just threw it into the scrap dumps. And they studied it, and the levels were 58,000 parts per trillion, like 800 times the EPA level. The cost of cleaning up is incredible. In North Carolina, there's a contaminated Cape Fear region, and it's either $46 or $137 million to build a plant and a couple million a year to operate it just for clean drinking water. And that does not give a clean environment for wildlife or anything. It just gives people clean drinking water. So it's super expensive. So we believe that these chemicals are so expensive and difficult to clean up that you need to stop their use in products. And that's what we've been working on. This is a paper we wrote about fluorine in fast food packaging paper. So that's like wrappers for fast food, microwave popcorn bags. If you have hot oil and you don't want to have it go through the paper, you coat the paper with PFAS, certain takeout containers. So we studied a lot of products. We wrote about it. We got lots of publicity. People in the Senate wrote the companies inquiring about their use of these chemicals. And the fast food companies have actually pretty much stopped using them. So this is a case, again, you have science, you have policy, and you have change. In carpet, that was the #1 source with children. We were able to get all the carpet companies, their leaders, to come to Berkeley and meet with scientists and business people and learn about the harm, because they'd gone from C8 to C6, and we were able to point out the harm. And these companies now have pretty much all moved away from any PFAS in their carpets. So then there are articles like Home Depot plans to phase out selling rugs and carpets containing PFAS. But the reason they can do that is because the companies decided to stop using it. So these are big successes based on science. The city of San Francisco is a big leader in their purchasing. They say no PFAS, no flame retardants, no antimicrobials. Those are 3 of our 6 classes. All these brands have moved away from all PFAS. We work a lot with IKEA, who is a real leader in removing harmful chemicals. But these brands have all done that. Some of them were picketed by Greenpeace, but whatever the reason, they've done the right thing. So no longer do, well, carpets, outdoor gear is moving away from it, clothing, food packaging, and furnishings. So I think it's an optimistic message that you can learn about these chemicals and move away. If any of you are fascinated by PFAS, we have a website called PFAS Central. And if you go to PFAS Central, we have the latest news. Like there's many stories every day. We pick the most interesting, the latest science, policy, and we have a page called PFAS Free, where we list products that don't contain PFAS. I mean, today I just had a conversation with the makers of Keen shoes. I don't know if any of you have Keens or have heard of them. They're in Oregon. And they wanted to remove PFAS from their whole line. They said they had 300 places in the different shoes they made had PFAS, and they got rid of all of them. And now they want to do a campaign so their neighbor down the street, which is Nike, might do the same thing. So good progress. Okay, now I'm going to tell you a little about flame retardants. And in the 70s, there were a lot of fires. People put flame retardants in lots of things. And standards have been updated. And so we heard that in the 70s, children's sleepwear. Anyway, I'll just tell the story. So when I talked about how if you bought your couch, basically couches, there's a California law called Technical Bulletin 117. And because of that, furniture foam to meet the standard had to be about 5% by weight flame retardants. And it was passed in 1976, and pretty much all for California furniture that was made between 1976 and 2014 would have a label like this. It would say Technical Bulletin 117, and the foam would be 5% flame retardants. And I imagine some of you have furniture like that, and I imagine you're not looking happy right now. I can't see you, but that's what I think. So it turns out that there's no fire safety benefit from that standard. It required the foam inside the furniture to withstand a small flame for 12 seconds. But if you do a thought experiment, you drop a candle on your couch, the fabric burns first, you have a large flame, and then the foam burns. And the flame retardants just make the fire smokier. So this is a bad standard. It adds toxic chemicals. It doesn't do anything for fire safety. The chemical that was used from 76 till about 2005, it's called Pentabde. There have been thousands of studies in animals and increasing numbers in people, and it has really adverse effects on brain development, reproduction. These are all human epidemiology studies. Women take longer to get pregnant. They have altered thyroid hormones during pregnancy that lead to problems in their children. And pretty much everybody in America has this chemical in them because all the furniture till 2005 did contain penta. It was replaced with chlorinated tris. These chemicals are what's called semi-volatile, so they're always coming out of furniture, for example, dropping into dust. So you have some dust on your hands, you eat a sandwich, you get exposed to flame retardant. So this is yet another, for coronavirus, we all know we have to wash our hands with soap and water a lot. We really should do it before eating for flame retardants. So cats have about 100 times the level of people. And why would that be? Because of their grooming behavior. They get dust on their fur, they lick their fur. Children, toddlers, unfortunately, often have 4 to 10 times the level of their parents because they crawl in the dust, they put their hands in their mouths. So this is a big problem. And as I said, there's no fire safety benefit. So going back to my story, in 2006, I guess, when my daughter started college and I decided I wanted to go back to science, I discovered all this, that these toxic tris, these flame retardants were in our furniture. There was no fire safety benefit. And I don't know if any of you remember, there was a Senator, Mark Leno, who was very progressive, and I got connected to him, and he said, well, we'll write a bill, and we can get rid of the flame retardants and stop fires in the fabric, and that's no flame retardants, more fire safety, no toxic chemicals, win-win. And we had support from firefighters and the manufacturers of furniture, children's products, all the foam had to have this chemicals too. Children's product, everybody supported this. And we had 4 bills, and none of them passed. And why would that be? Because of Californians for Fire Safety. And do you know who Californians for Fire Safety were? The three manufacturers of flame retardants called. And the first year, we had like a surprise where we almost passed a bill. And in a week, Californians for Fire Safety spent $6 million advertising all over the state to stop our bill. And it was documented they spent $23 million. And that was back when I was working for free. Our institute was at my house. It was me and my cats and a couple students, and $23 million on the other side. But ultimately, we were successful. The biggest thing that happened is I kept trying to get the press to cover this, and some Chicago Tribune reporters who'd won Pulitzer Prize came to one of these crazy hearings in Sacramento. And they wrote this series of articles, Playing with Fire, and they are scandalous. If you want to read some good scandal, you can find them, Playing with Fire, Chicago Tribune. But you read the subtitle, A Deceptive Campaign by Industry Brought Toxic Flame Retardants into Our Homes and into our bodies, and the chemicals don't even work as promised. And there's a story of this burn doctor who was paid, hundreds of thousands of dollars to make up stories about some baby dying because they didn't have flame retardants in their crib. Anyway, incredible stories. And turns out at the same time this was happening, I had started hiking with the new governor, Jerry Brown, senior advisor. And in those days, anybody who went hiking with me got an earful about flame retardants. And my friends would say, we'll go hiking with you, but you have to promise only to talk about flame retardants half the time. I mean, I was so boring, I was a little obsessed. Like, these chemicals, they cause health harm and they're in everything and nobody's doing anything. And anyway, so I got a few chances to hike with Ken Alex, Jerry Brown's senior advisor, and he got it. And then he told the governor, and the governor said he would do something, but he was afraid of the chemical industry. And then when this series came out, the chemical industry, this was pretty embarrassing. I mean, their behavior is so scandalous. And there were 10 stories, long stories, documenting their behavior. So what happened is the law changed, and there's a new standard, called California TB 17-2013. So if your couch, and there's a label now, and that will say contains added flame retardants or contains no added flame retardants. And if you go home and you look at your couch, usually under the center cushion, you'll find a label. And hopefully it will say contains no added flame retardants. And if it does say contains added flame retardants, things have now changed. So all the foam pretty much in foam stores doesn't have flame retardants. So you can actually just replace the foam in your couch, replace the old toxic TB 117 foam, which would be 5% chlorinated tris or Pentabde, the thing that causes all the neurological problems. And you can replace it with clean foam without flame retardants. We talk about that on our website. So that was a big deal, and I got rewarded. This was the most glamorous night of my life. Jerry Brown was giving the California Hall of Fame medal to Robert Redford and Joan Baez, some of my biggest heroes. So that was really awesome, and that was for helping. And he said that was one of the most important things he did while he was governor, was change the law so that, and it's not only all of California, because the California law was followed across all of the US and Canada. So everybody had flame retardants in their couches, their dust, and in them. And so now that's been changed. So it's a very positive story. So I'll just end by saying, please take 5 minutes or whatever. In half an hour, you can see all 6 videos in the introduction, and you'll know a lot more about how to have a healthy home. And I hope some of you might want to sign up for our monthly newsletters. You can write me, Arlene, at arleneblum.com, or if you go to any of our websites, there's greensciencepolicy.org, 6 classes, PFAS Central, you get a little screen saying, please sign our mailing list. So I hope you will. I hope to get to hear from some of you. So I'll just end by saying, by limiting the use of the 6 classes, we can have a healthier world. So thank you.
Bravo.
Thank you very much, Arlene. That was amazing. We're going to go on with some Q&A time in just a moment, but first, Tony has an announcement about signing up for the newsletters, etc.
Certainly. Arlene, this is always fantastic, and it's such a pleasure to hear you talk. So I will send out a email to our group, and if anyone wants to join her newsletters, please respond to that email. She has two, one that focuses on green science policy and one that focuses on expeditions and mountaineering and that. And also on behalf of the Palo Alto University Rotary, the Environmental Impact Committee, Arlene, we will be making a donation to your organization.
Thank you. We're very appreciative. We'll put it to good
We're
use.
grateful for you and all the changes you're making.